started now that we've broken the seal with Bathroom Talk. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined us today. Super excited to get into this conversation with Steve. But first, I wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Roger. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Jar Audio. And for those that don't know, Jar Audio is a podcast production agency that works exclusively with brands to help them produce, promote, and measure their podcasts. Known Steve for a very long time, but I'm super excited to dig into his new and very first book, which is called Earn It: Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers. Just as a reminder, today is a conversation between Steve and I, but also a conversation with you as well. So the Q&A feature is open. We've already gotten a few questions about my bathroom flooding scenario, but feel free to jump in with any questions that you'll have for Steve. We'll try to get them throughout the conversation, or we might collect a few and answer them at the very well. But before we get started, everyone please meet Steve Pratt. Hey, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Roger. I'm super excited to be here, and nice to see all of you. Thanks for spending time with us today.
I'm super excited as well. Now, I'm a huge reader. I listen to a lot of podcasts, obviously, but when I'm not listening to podcasts, I'm reading, and obviously a big fan of business books. And I got to be honest, when you shared with me the galley copy of Earn It, and I gave it a read, first of all, I read it in a couple of days. Steve, it's fantastic. It's truly one of the most unique business books on the market right now, especially with a marketing slant to it. What's the book about? Give everyone a quick little overview.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I guess if you didn't, we wouldn't be doing this. But
well,
yeah.
we would have a different conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
We'd still talk.
Yeah, it'd be more of a bathroom renovation chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the book is about the need for marketers to set a higher bar if they actually want to get results today, because there's so many things vying for our attention as consumers and audiences that we've all set our own bars really, really high for what we actually give our very precious time and attention to. And the old ways of doing things, of interrupting people or buying attention or capturing it or stealing it, don't really work very well anymore. They have very, very, very low conversion rates. And I think this is obvious to probably a lot of people on the webinar, but the internet has allowed anybody to make great stuff and to be able to earn time and attention without a gatekeeper. And I think that that's the opportunity that the book puts out there. There is a path to earning lots of time and attention, and it's hard work, but it's really worth it, and it's really successful when you do it properly.
Awesome. And who's the book for?
The book is for, I use the term in the title, Brave Marketers. It's Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers.
We've got a ton of brave marketers here right now.
Yeah, welcome, Brave Marketers. It's for people who want to think differently and recognize that the status quo isn't working for them the way that they want it to, or the people who are already understand that there's a better way of going forward and want to hear some stories about brands and strategies and techniques that actually have been very effective in the real world for doing it.
Awesome.
So I think it applies to creators and production companies and those sorts of people too. Like, honestly, in some weird way, I think this may be overthinking it, but we're all marketers in some shape of in our lives. If you post on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, you want more time and attention from people, up to actual creators and production companies and marketers. So yeah.
I mean, my 6-year-old is trying to sell us on why he should get to watch more YouTube, and is kind of trying to market himself as not being affected by the crazy people on it.
I remember my kids did a PowerPoint deck to get a dog for us. So there you go. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so you mentioned a little while ago about sort of the crowded market out there, and this sort of traditional advertising world right now. And I came from that traditional advertising world, spending 22 plus years in agencies, and it's actually the catalyst for why I started Jar. Was I just started getting tired of the sort of screaming and yelling and not really thinking about the human behind the consumer out there. So give everybody a little bit more of a state of play as to what the traditional market looks like right now, so that they can kind of identify how to get out of that.
Well, it's interesting. Like I had the same aha moment as you did, except I was on the media side of it. Where I saw a lot of advertisers leaving traditional media because people could bypass it and skip it and avoid ads. And I think in the digital space, you see the rise of ad blockers and, streaming services where you are paying to avoid things that you don't want.
Mm,
Um, and if you kind of Google conversion rates on a lot of, interruptive marketing techniques, you'll see they're like really like single digit, like even like sub 1% conversion rates. And I think
mm.
it's worth stepping back and thinking from a, like a big zoom out. Are we okay with annoying 99% of the people we're trying to reach? And is there a better way forward to actually connect with more people and build relationships and trust with them where they're more likely to become customers by making things that they actually want rather than, kind of forcing things down their throat in the way that we all bought into before? Because it was the only, the model was we all agreed we were going to watch ads or be interrupted in order to get the shows we wanted for free. And just the rules of the game have changed, and as consumers we don't want to do that anymore. And I think as marketers we need to embrace that and think more about, let's make some stuff that people are actually excited to see from us, or at the end of it, after they spend time with us, with our marketing efforts or the content we've put out, where they're like, that was time well spent. If I was going to do that again, I would choose to do that again because it was that valuable. I think that's the really interesting opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's interestingly, I saw a report recently. I want to say it was from Forrester or one of the different think tanks and researchers around kind of spending in the marketing space coming out of COVID. And obviously a lot of businesses lost a lot of revenue during COVID, and so there was this sense of we need to recoup all that money back, and it absolutely needs to happen as quick as possible. So obviously a big shift towards the conversion, channels, traditional, conversion channels, but actually, and a lot of those brands had actually turned off the marketing tap during COVID. But actually the brands that continued, building the brand during COVID, obviously shifting to accommodate, everyone's new way of living and thinking, and factoring in everyone's fear and all that sort of stuff. The brands that actually continue to build brands and continue to deliver value all throughout COVID have actually vastly outperformed those that turned the tap off because they just kept delivering tons and tons of value.
I think it's really interesting too, like one of the mindset shifts that I think you need to be successful in more of a content space or a brave marketing space is to embrace patience. When you're
Oh,
talking about everybody wanting this real short-term ROI, most people don't think or act like that. Like if you think about it through the lens of a relationship, no one wants to be proposed to on the first date. You kind of want to get to know somebody and know who they are and their values and what they stand for, and that takes time and patience. And that is actually the route to success in making, successful branded podcasts or any sort of creation or marketing piece. Surprise people with awesome value and generosity over time works a lot better than trying to convert people in the next month to hit your shareholder targets.
but I
It's a
can I can
hard but unpleasant truth.
even though we're all remote, I can literally hear people in the on this webinar say to themselves, kind of easier said than done, Steve. My boss is breathing down my neck right now, and I need to deliver. So, what would you say to somebody like that recognizes and believes in long-term value creation, but is also up against the wall when it comes to the need to immediately see performance?
Well, I guess it feels a little bit like if you're promising things that aren't really possible, like you're delaying the inevitable of
Mm.
having to, you're either going to have to, you know, buy downloads that aren't real or buy consumption that isn't real in order to give the impression that you're doing that. And I think it will catch up with you in the long run. Having a level setting conversation with other people in your organization around the actual long game, and that it's worth it to do this to get the actual win that builds customers and loyalty and word of mouth. And talking about the brands that have done it, I think it's always been a really awesome thing that's worked well for me is to just use the table stakes of like, here's what everybody else is doing that's finding success in this place, and setting that from day one so that people go in with their eyes open. And if people, I know this is probably also not a popular opinion, but like if there's a desire for a real short-term ROI on something that isn't going to deliver it, maybe it's a good idea for you to not push doing that stuff, because it generally like really is very, very hard to do. So Yeah, have the hard conversations early, be honest and open about it, and try and advocate for doing the right thing over time.
Awesome. Love that. So, when everyone reads the book, one of the stories they're going to see is you know, one of the first podcasts that you made with a brand, which was with the brand Slack. Obviously massive success story now, bought by Salesforce. I'm curious though, at the time, podcast and a brand, that wasn't really being done. So how did you convince them to take that leap of faith and move forward with something that, just frankly, there was not a lot of empirical evidence to say this is going to be a success?
Honestly, I give full credit to them. They were brave
Mhm.
marketers. They already were doing all sorts of other really smart, fun things with their brand. They have a really playful and unique brand voice. They had a strong point of view on the future of work. And, we met with their CMO at the time, a guy named Bill Masitis, who's just super smart, progressive, brave marketer. And we pitched this idea of doing like a show, like a real show, not an infomercial for Slack. And after 2 meetings, they were just like, yes, this sounds great. Let's like do it. We know that customers at Slack come from having great, like surprisingly exceptional brand touch points. And it takes, I can't remember the exact number, like 12, 15, 20 brand touch points that were exceptional before
Yeah.
somebody signed up to create a team or become a customer, and that you can put people on a schedule with content. And if the content is fabulous, they're going to be pleasantly surprised, being like, oh, what a great experience I had with this software company called Slack about the future of work that is not trying to sell me their product all the time. Um, so I learned a lot from our first client, where they taught us a lot about the marketing success and the strategy of why these things work. And we kind of went away and figured it out, collaborating with them about how to make a podcast. And to your point, I think that's the opportunity. It's harder today because there's so many branded podcasts out there. But one of the reasons the Slack one worked was because it was so unusual and different than anything else out there, that it actually got a lot of PR, and people who listened to it were like, this actually sounds a lot like Slack. It sounds like a very different type of podcast. And I think that, it's again, a harder job to do today in a crowded marketplace, but that's still the opportunity, is to make something that's different and that stands out and that is creatively brave and can only come from your company. That's what people will pay attention to, rather than a clone of every other show that's out there.
Awesome. Awesome. So for those that are just joining us, you're watching and listening to Steve Pratt, who's the author of Earn It, incredible new book, which I absolutely suggest everyone go out and get. Just a reminder, we do have our Q&A open. So if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to drop them in there. I haven't done Zoom like this in a long time, so I don't think anybody can see those questions, but there are some questions in there. They happen to all be related to my bathroom, because we started out by telling about a leak in my bathroom. Um,
That was a great
let's
reset, Roger. Nice job.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you. Let's talk about George Costanza. I'm a big fan, big Seinfeld fan, and in the book you talk a lot about the idea of sort of thinking opposite, and if wonder if you can just dig a little bit deeper into why George Costanza comes up in the book.
Yeah, so that's great. Honestly, that I love. This has been a recurring theme from people who read the book. There's all sorts of Seinfeld stuff that has come at me because of this chapter about Costanza marketing.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if any of you are Seinfeld fans, you might remember the episode called The Opposite, where nothing in George's life is going the way that he wants. And so he decides to do the exact opposite of every one of his instincts, and suddenly finds himself, going on dates and getting a job at the Yankees and all these sorts of things. And for me, the concept of doing the opposite is a really powerful one in marketing as well. Not just because a lot of the things, as we talked about earlier, in the status quo don't work as well as they used to, and sometimes really don't work that well. That doing the opposite works very, very well. But also doing the opposite is a way to stand out and differentiate yourself and be a little bit more memorable than everybody else. Um, I really, honestly, like I feel like doing the opposite is a great life skill in general. Sometimes I found a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT for short. And it's for people with emotional regulation issues and borderline personality disorder and a few other things. And it has this set of skills in it for how to, manage your emotions and run your life more effectively. And one of them is called opposite action. And, if, for example, like
All right.
if you were depressed and you wanted to stay in bed all day, doing the opposite action would be like, I'm going to do the opposite of what I feel like doing and get outside and go for a walk and get some fresh air in nature and get some sunshine. I think that might also apply through the lens of marketing around what's the easy thing to do, or what is the thing that I'm just used to doing where I'm stuck in a rut, and what would the opposite of that be, and how might that benefit, my ability to earn more attention and have more success with marketing. So there's a
Love.
lot, there's a lot of a lot of the book is, here's where the status quo might be, and here's the opposite of it and why it might work.
Yeah, and I think that, can you think of some examples of some brands that have kind of taken a bit of a turn, bit of a 180 when it comes to their way of thinking and marketing? I know you mentioned Slack, but what are some other examples that might be a little bit more recent that you've seen out in the market?
Yeah, so you know what? This is one I haven't talked about before, but I really love. So when I think about learning a language, and I'm old, so but I think of, like, I remember when I took French in university, I would have to go into like a room and have like these headsets with a little thing where it'd just tell you phrases, and you'd have to repeat them over and over again and things. It felt like it was a very strange experience. It was not a fun, exciting, enjoyable thing to just sit in a room with other people with headsets on, doing this stuff. And Duolingo, I feel like they have just embraced the exact opposite of what people think learning a language is, and their content strategy. They're trying to make it fun to learn different languages, and their content strategy is next level. Like, they consistently surprise me with, I think the term for this in marketing is unhinged, which I love. I love the term unhinged marketing. But it's kind of like, oh, did someone actually approve that? Like, who approved
Yeah,
that?
I could see like a CUO, like a chief unhinged officer.
I would love that job.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be perfect for it.
But they did it. So they take their mascot. If you should go to their TikTok channel and see their mascot, which is this owl called Duo, and the stuff they do with this owl is bananas. Like, it's very entertaining, and I would agree, unhinged, but they kind of really commit in a very big way. Like, their April Fools last year, they did a whole fake thing where they made a fake touring figure skating show called Duolingo on Ice. And they had like professional dancers and figure skaters making like a video about it. And I think they had like tour dates on SeatGeek, and like, there's a soundtrack of Duolingo figure skating songs on Spotify, and people loved it. People talked about it all over the place. I mean, that's a big April Fool's thing, but they do a
Yeah.
ton of stuff all the time. They have a fake rivalry with Google Translate. They are having fun embracing their values, like on TikTok, of making fun stuff about what they're trying to make the experience of learning languages like. And I think it's awesome.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. I wanted to share one that patting my team's back. We've been doing with the team at JAR. So one of our clients is Allianz, international trade group. International insurance group. Quite a large company. I'm going to be honest. When I came to Jen, my co-founder and our chief creative officer, and said, "Hey, we're going to work with an insurance group. It's not just insurance; it's international trade insurance." She almost punched me in the face. You can imagine that that's probably going to be a pretty boring topic and not exactly something that would fall under the easy to tell some stories around. But you know what? I give the team there a ton of credit at Allianz. They were absolute brave marketers, and collectively we've produced a show for them 2 years in a row called Wheel of Risk, and it's sort of like a game show, and it's all about risk. But essentially, it goes into all the different aspects of risk. But then, of course, we fill in some of the storytelling with some examples that have come from international trade and Allianz, which actually turns out is fascinating. Turns out, insurance and risk is absolutely fascinating. It's been a very popular show, and it's actually kind of like reshaped internally part of the organization because they're even using it for onboarding their staff. They're putting a lot of fun into it, while at the same time educating their audience and getting a ton of and the audience is getting a ton of value as well.
You know what I love
Um,
about that, Roger, honestly, is this is another do the opposite, is take a format or a genre of a show that is not normally associated with a particular subject matter, and you mix them together and it creates something really, really different. So a game show with
Totally.
trade insurance,
Yeah.
no one's like, you're the only show on the planet doing that, and it's going to be the most interesting, memorable, trade show or trade insurance podcast out there.
Totally.
One of the most fun things that I enjoyed doing in the book. There's this, sorry for the long tangent on this, but one of my
Please.
favorite books of all time is this book from the comedian John Hodgman, who does like Judge John Hodgman as a podcast. And he used to be the PC guy in the Mac PC ads. And he had this book that came out called The Areas of My Expertise. And it's a fake almanac of complete world knowledge. And the whole book
Right.
is fake. It is brilliant. Like it's so funny, but in the middle of it, there's this huge chunk about the history of American hobo culture, and he has pages and pages and pages of 700 hobo names. And I remember reading, like seeing it for the first time, being like, this is extraordinary to see in the middle of a book, just like reams and reams of names, and they're all funny. Like you actually go read through it, and that they're very creative and entertaining. And anyways, I took a page from his book and did a version of that with formats in this one, where there's a huge display of things that we all know and see in the real world. And it could be anything from like a grocery receipt to a diary entry to, a figure skating musical or a game show. But I think it's a really interesting opportunity creatively to look around you and see what formats or conventions are out there in the real world. And could we map that to our subject matter and make something that's really unique and interesting that is going to stand out and people will remember because it's different?
I love that. I love that so much. And I want to pick up that book after I pick up your book.
Yeah, so good.
Um, so, Steve, we've got a couple questions that have popped up here. First one is from an anonymous attendee. They say, Steve, how do you balance the need to be flexible, collaborative, et cetera, with clients so that you're all aligned and can move forward, and the need for creative bravery so that the content itself stands out and grabs and holds attention? In other words, when do you compromise and when do you dig in?
So it's a very good question. Creative bravery is a relative scale, I would say, for every organization and sometimes every industry. Creatively brave can mean different things. And the way that I've always handled it, and it's worked, very well, is to actually put that up in the room on a whiteboard
Mm.
at the start of a session, and to say, here's our goal, is to be as creatively brave as we can in what we're going to develop here. And we're going to do everything we can to make something that is from us and not about us, and something that feels like a real show to the audience, where you could ask yourself, would you listen to this or watch this or read this if
Mm.
you didn't work here? Would you tell other people about this if you didn't work here? Is it that good? Because that's what you're competing against. You're not competing against other things from other brands. You're not competing against your competitors necessarily for time and attention. You're competing against everything.
Yeah.
So, holding
And
yourself,
Netflix and books and video
yeah,
games and
yeah,
yeah, it's
TikTok,
so much.
sleeping. I don't know. You're competing against all of it. These are all choices, right? Um, and so, having that conversation out of the gate, saying this is our goal, and then as you're going through the process of developing a show or developing a content strategy, checking in occasionally, and particularly when people have ideas that might be like, hey, why don't we have our executive team host it and talk to each other every episode and talk about our own products and services. You can kind of bring it back. Okay, let's map that on the creative bravery scale. Where is that from 1 to 10 on there? And, again, from what I was saying earlier, when we talk about creative bravery, introducing it out of the gate, using examples of companies that are very creatively brave as table stakes, and again, almost setting the bar high for people from the get-go, being, okay, here's what works out there. Let's see what we can do in the room today. It kind of forces a change in people's mindset and makes it harder to to slide down into corporate infomercial.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the corporate infomercial can very quickly happen too, right? Like, I mean, we see it all the time. It could be anything from, hey, we want to, have so and so from our company on as a guest, but then it turns into all the guests are from the company, or it could be, we want to tell a lot of stories about our brand. But then you obviously get the super easy ones, which is, hey, I'm the CMO of a international paper towel distributor, and we really think the world needs to hear from our CEO, and he wants to be the host of this podcast. Quite easily we can, we as an agency can tell them, like, nobody's going to listen to that. But to be able to do that in advance, like, or to even have the courage to make those calls yourself, and in some cases stand up to your CEO who really wants his voice out there, takes a lot of guts. But I love the visual of putting everything up on the wall
It is
as
honestly,
well.
it's really hard with the power dynamics to talk
Yeah.
openly and honestly around what's going to be helpful or not in terms of having a successful podcast. And I think thinking about what success looks like why are you making this marketing piece, or whether it's a podcast or a video or whatever it is, what does success look like for that?
Mhm.
And one of the questions, again, sometimes starting off with this before anybody talks about who's going to host it or what the name of the show is or what the podcast art is, will be like, let's talk about the things about what our goals are for it and how we get people in to start consuming it. And then talk about the things that would be like, would this be helpful or a hindrance to getting people to actually come in and try it?
Right.
And if you think about the idea of pitching a show, one of my favorite examples is a show that our team used to do with Dell Technologies called Trailblazers with Walter Isaacson.
Right.
If you look at the podcast art for Trailblazers, there's no Dell logo on it.
Oh, no.
There's nothing. And it looks and feels like a real show. It doesn't look like it's a piece of branded content. And I think if you listen to it, you would say it doesn't sound like a piece of branded content. It sounds like a real business show hosted by this iconic innovation disruption biographer, Walter Isaacson. And the fact that there's no logo and that it's not a Dell executive like Michael Dell hosting it were creatively brave choices made by the Dell team to be like, let's make something that we actually get people in and start listening.
Right.
And so
because the listeners, you'd have to be blind not to eventually, or you have to not be paying attention to not know that it's coming from Dell.
yeah, there's this magic moment of surprise where it's like where people find out it's from Dell and they're like, oh, I was expecting to be sold something from this, or
Right.
I didn't know who this was from. That's amazing that Dell is making one of my favorite shows. And it happens to be about innovation and disruption and digital transformation, that you'd associate that with Dell from listening to it. So there's a very strong business case for doing it and very strong business outcome when you do it, but you don't get any of those things if people never make the click to start listening, because you're signaling to them that it's an ad with who the host is and having logos and things in the name all over the podcast art.
Awesome. So for those that have joined, we're talking with Steve Pratt, the author of Earn It. Super excited to be talking about brave marketing and earning attention in a crowded market. So we've got a really great question that's popped up from another anonymous attendee. Steve, I'm really curious about this idea of doing the opposite. Can you help think of the opposite for being in a space that is offering trauma care? That's deep. That's
yeah,
deep.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. So I have been very lucky to be working with a few very interesting nonprofits lately. And and I'm not sure whether you're talking about a nonprofit with trauma care or not, but I think the idea is what is the gift that you can give to people who might be in need of trauma care that you have deep expertise in, that they are going to value, and how can you put things out there that might be helpful or valuable to that group of people? So without knowing that much about your particular situation, if there are things that you can put out there that would genuinely help the people that you're seeking to work with, they're going to find out who you are because they're searching for things and find out what you're putting out is actually helpful and and assisting them in their time of need. And if it's things that, you're looking for funding or support, I think thinking about what are the things that you can put out there that, again, a lot about, that would be valuable and help other people in their lives, even if it is not, full scale giant trauma, but how can you help your experiences, your lived experiences of helping people with trauma,
Yeah.
help everybody with their ordinary life. I think it's very similar in a weird way, like the dialectical behavior therapy piece that I was talking about earlier. It's designed for a very tough set of mental health challenges and personality disorder challenges, but everybody can use those skills. It's just that they're not taught outside of that. And I'd be curious to know if there's anything like that on the trauma care side.
Yeah, interesting. Our team also works with a lot of nonprofits, and we actually work with BC Women's Hospital, unbelievable hospital here in British Columbia, and we're approached by a group called the Hummingbird Project, which specializes in support for families and specific women who have gone through stillbirth. Unbelievably challenging project. However, we created a podcast that has been an incredible resource for families that have gone through a stillbirth. The podcast is called Stillbirth Happens. For those that are interested in listening to it, but it's hosted by two women that have had stillbirths, and they are using the show as a way to honor their unborn children, but also just incredibly brave guests who come on to share their experiences. And it's won awards, and it's done incredibly well, and continues to be a resource that they're going to be using for a very, very long time.
I think with some of these really tough life experiences, having a podcast where people can talk about their experiences, and where you can, if you're going through it, where that you're not alone and that it has happened to other people, and you hear what their journey's been like. Podcasting is a very powerful medium for sharing tough, vulnerable, emotional experiences. So yeah,
it's intimate. You're having a private moment with the listener. You're literally whispering in their ear.
Yep.
Oh,
is someone whispering in your ear?
I touched my oh god, I touched them and they turned off.
Okay.
You're whispering in your listener's ear. I should be wearing oven mitts. All right, we've got a question from, hey, it's Chris Nelson. I haven't seen Chris Nelson. If this is the Chris Nelson, I think it is. I've seen Chris in a very long time, back in my spring days. So, hi, longtime listener, first time caller. Just curious, have you heard from those egghead marketers, not biased by the way, who retreat to things like SEO, pay-per-click, CPC, CTR, CPL, S&M, and other garbage acronyms of marketing, who might find the idea of relying on being interesting as a strategy is terrifying? If so, what do they say and what do you tell them? Again, not biased. Also, have we ever discussed why people hate cowards?
The Lord hates cowards. Okay.
I didn't know. As I'm reading them, I'm like, should I be saying this?
So I know Chris. Chris and I used to work together at Vancouver Television, which is like a startup TV station here in Vancouver, and we worked together at Much Music, where Chris did like amazing work with independent music and cool bands out here. Anyways, Chris has a giant tattoo on his arm that says "The Lord hates cowards," and I think that is his version of creative bravery.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, but it's a reminder to go for it, right? And to go do that stuff. And Chris, that's super funny about the acronyms. And it's honestly, it's fascinating. They're not. This is not for everybody. Like honestly, the reason it is in here, unconventional strategies for brave marketers, it is not for everybody. And there are going to be people who want to just shovel money into things that have 1% conversion rates, and they're going to be okay with massive amount of frequency of just playing the same things over and over and over again, where it feels like propaganda. And you're like, if I see that, insurance, ad about a bathroom flood in Roger's house one more time.
I watch, I sometimes will doom scroll / watch and then watch MSNBC, before I go to bed. And I don't know who has made, who has decided to throw all this money into MSNBC, but there's a brand called Blue Chew out there, which is a gum which essentially has Viagra in it. And they own every single 30-second spot after I think it's 8 or 9 o'clock. And it just is wall to wall Blue Chew. By the way, it doesn't work. No, I'm joking. I'm kidding. But I mean, they just, it's at the point where it just pisses me off. And clearly they've, bought into the, impression side of things and are just all in on it, but there's no storytelling. They're so boring and just terrible to listen to and watch.
Well, it's funny. I think that's like, it's interesting, that we're talking about it, but not in a good way.
Yeah.
And so there's word of mouth that is encouraging people to go do it because it's created value in your life and you want to tell other people about it because it's been helpful. And there's word of mouth that is like, if I see that thing one more time, I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
And, so I don't know, just going back to Chris on that piece, I think in some ways that's what our mission as brave marketers is, to try and change people's perspective on how they think about this stuff and to think about it more from a generous point of view around who are you trying to reach and what is the most effective way to reach them and have an impact on them, rather than what are my objectives and how can I, force my objectives onto unwilling participants.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So another great question has popped up from Christopher Mines, who asks, are we in a saturated content market partly due to sloppy AI outputs? It might be more challenging for good and original content to get seen and shared. Do you think some shops are simply shooting from the hip? To counter this, should content KPIs be more reasonable by saying, my name is George, I'm unemployed, and I live with my parents?
I love that. I love that.
That.
So I do think we are living in just an oversaturated content market. I do think AI is partly to blame. I think it's going to get worse with AI flooding things. The ability to make an entire content strategy, fabricated in minutes rather than weeks and months. Like it's real. And I think it's actually a bigger opportunity to lean into some of these ideas around creative bravery and doing the opposite, because that's actually how you stand out and earn people's time and attention. And, the human ability to tell stories that come from you or to tell other people's stories rather than regurgitating, kind of an aggregation of all the different things on the internet synthesized together. Think about what are the things that humans can do that AI can't, and what are the things that are going to be surprising and unexpected and truly original that break patterns rather than follow them. To me, that's the really interesting opportunity. And when you talk about that glut of average content, I think, I hope that there are going to be more people who realize that that is actually not a good use of time or money to make something that fits in and blends in and is very conventional.
Yeah.
And I think some of the instinct is that we need to have more content out there and to be always on, and that volume and of output is what success is about. And this is another do the opposite, but I would say do fewer things and have people waiting for more of them, and have them be really, really good and really differentiated, where people are waiting for it because it's scarce. So scarce, high quality stuff for me feels like the path going forward rather than always on average. And I think the more we can embrace that, and it's hard work to do it. This is the unpopular part. It's hard work to do that, but it's also really, really fun. And then you get to see the connection that you're making by producing things that people actually spend lots of time with and enjoy and get value out of. There's a huge win, all over the board for doing that. And I think that is also one of these strange do the opposite things.
Right. You mentioned sort of putting something out there that's already has a lot of the same type of medium, or you see a lot of the similar stuff from your competitors. Like, do you think marketers are doing a good enough job of actually just taking a pause and even doing the research to see what else is out there? Like, I'm quite surprised with the amount of conversations we have with marketers about podcasts that have come to us with an idea, which is great, and we always love to hear it. But just a very quick Google search can tell them that this is being done like 5-6 times by people in your category or in your vertical.
Yeah, I think it's a
Curious what you
great point.
think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel so there's two pieces. One, I think if you're the second, third, fourth, fifth show doing the exact same thing in your subject matter area for the same audience, why bother? And it's very easy to do the research and figure out what's out there. And whether that is just searching inside podcast apps, whether it's using, the my friends Dan and Jonas at Bumper do these amazing podcast neighborhoods. And I think there's a tool
Yeah,
called Raphonic that does it as well.
yeah.
You can very quickly see like where is our audience and what are they already listening to or where are they being served already. And that should be a starting point to say like, okay, let's not do the same thing as everybody else. What's the unique value that we can offer that isn't being offered already? Where can we, what is something that only we can put out there that is going to create additional and unique value for those people? And if you don't have a good answer for that, I'm not sure that I would go for it and put it out there. And it's fascinating. Honestly, like I feel that the nature of podcasting for some reason, maybe it's the explosion of shows like Joe Rogan and others where people just think, what's a podcast? Oh, it's two people talking for an hour or 3 hours. And that is not the sum total of what audio can do. And in fact, I would argue that we haven't really scratched the surface of all the different things that audio can do and taking full advantage of the powers of audio and the theater of the mind and great storytelling and sound design.
Amen.
That as we explore more formats and more ways of telling stories and using audio, that people are going to find a lot more success with that as well. And so just to go back to the fewer things better at higher quality, it might be fewer things better and thinking differently about how you use audio that is not just a chat or conversation show. What is the best way to get across the ideas that we want for listeners in the most engaging way? It may be something that's not out there already. And I think embracing that and trying it would be a brilliant idea.
So, sticking to the audio space, what are some ways that you can be creatively brave that don't necessarily cost a fortune? That aren't going to bankrupt some of these independent podcasters. Thinking specifically about podcasting, but it could be anywhere in the audio space.
Well, I think one, as we were talking about, thinking of some ideas to make something that's different, and ideas are free, right? Like an idea for how you do it. You can make this a very small budget and come up with an idea that is different. And we talked about the formats paired with unusual subject matter. It could be an unusual selection of guests, but combining unusual things together to make something that is new and different to me is a very smart way of making something on any budget. And then there's stuff, honestly, that is just worth doing that's going to make your show a better listen for audiences. And very basic things like editing, cutting out the parts that are boring and making, not wasting a second of the listener's time, or rearranging the parts of the show so that you have a fantastic beginning that is going to hook people's attention right away with something compelling and promise them something that is going to be delivered at the end of the episode and create a narrative arc for doing that. I would rather have, honestly, somebody comes in and says, I'd like to make 20 episodes and this is my budget per episode. And it ends up being something that all the budget is just for a one-take chat show with no editing. I would prefer to have 5 or 6 episodes at the same budget and be able to edit it and have a bit of a narrative arc, or to really do a good job with maybe a couple of different interviews and splice them together to make something that is going to be a better listen and more memorable. And again, convey the idea that I'm trying to get into, to put out into the world that would be helpful to listeners to do that most effectively.
Totally agree. On that note, what's your perspective on the sort of debate around engagement versus reach, audience size? Because, inevitably when we're talking about investing in these sorts of, long form media, people want to have a massive audience. People want to see a ton of reach. But we always talk about, engagement being more important. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm very biased. It's another do the opposite thing. My book is really about earning attention, and attention is time.
Mhm.
And so for me, the most important measurement, especially in podcasting, is your completion rates, the time spent listening. So out of everybody who clicks play, how much of the episode did they get through?
Yeah.
And you can see very different shaped curves of completion rates with different types of podcasts. And there's some that have really boring beginnings, or a generic beginning, or 10 minutes of just babble off the top that don't really tell you what you're getting and don't get right into it. And you'll see this just cliff of people leaving in the first minute or two, and then just declines over time. And to me, that is kind of the lazy, unedited, not audience first podcast. And if you have an amazing first minute or two, where you're dropping people into the middle of a story and promising it's going to be resolved by the end of the episode, or if you promise a question or an unconventional point of view, or something that you're going to learn by the end of the episode, right off the top, you can see like a very relatively flat line going through there. To me, that's the power of audio, that no one gets a half hour of time over and over and over again. I'm just picking a half hour as a show length.
Yeah.
You can't get that on YouTube. You can't get that on TikTok. You just can't get that amount of time of people with full foreground attention anywhere else. And so to me, that is the power of podcasting, and what you should be focusing on doing. If you reach a ton of people and people only stick around for 30 seconds, I think you failed. And I know that reach is out there as the number one metric, because that's how advertising is measured, and you're paying to reach the most number of people possible. And that metrics like CPMs are just baked into everything. I don't actually think that's the right way to think about stuff, especially if it's branded content. It's sometimes focusing on a smaller number of people and making the best thing in the world for those people, and knowing that they valued it and spent tons and tons of time with it, is a much more, effective marketing strategy than spraying something out to 2 million people that ends up in 15 people listening to it.
Totally.
Yeah. So in
Yeah,
some
no,
ways, thinking about a cost per listen versus
Mhm.
a cost per minute of attention, those are metrics that are interesting to me to think about, rather than a cost per 1,000 people reached. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a creator out there, if you're connected to your brand and you're investing in these sorts of mediums, like, you have to also have a plan for how you're going to assess the analytics behind it, or the data behind it. So if you're going to invest in certain platforms, make sure that there's a really clear way to see the performance of these shows. Otherwise, you're flying blind. And I think a lot of these mediums, especially with podcasting, are organic and are fluid, in the sense that you can make future decisions based on, podcasting is not live radio. So you can make future decisions based on what the data says, and you can sort of evolve the show. But you have to be, you have to also be brave to get in there and make some tough decisions if the numbers are showing you
Well, I think
that
also,
things are working.
like setting the bar again, from day one, especially if you have stakeholders in your organization, around the fact that we're going, like, success in this medium is time and attention, and it is not a reach medium.
Yeah.
It will lower if you can get buy-in on that from day one, it lowers the pressure to have to do things like buy consumption, or spend lots of money on reach campaigns that don't actually get people listening to the podcast and spending time with you.
Yeah. I know Liz Hames, our head of audience growth at JAR, is on the webinar, and she always has the luxury of being able to tell our clients that, based on the data, each individual audience member is spending hours with the brand. You think about a 30-minute show, a 30-minute episode times X amount of episodes, like, that's a lot of time spent with the brand. But then some, this doesn't happen with us, but some podcasters, they're not getting that, because they're so obsessed with the download number, the audience size. But when you look behind the curtain, it's they're spending a few seconds with you, or a minute. You also see that happening with a lot of sort of the testosterone options in media with podcasts, sort of juicing the numbers, getting things as high as possible audience size wise, but there's nothing behind it. Anyways, we have 8 minutes left. I want to get to a few more of these questions here. So somebody has asked, I'm going to kind of give it the précis here, that how are we defining bravery? For example, it's gonna mean different things to different people. This person might be in a traditional organization, or they're surrounded by tradition. Is bucking that tradition considered brave? Is revealing more of our personal story through branding or marketing brave? I think we know the answer to that one. And is it guided by the feeling that we get, or the decisions we make and how those make us feel?
I think the biggest piece for me is whether you are making it with your audience's needs in mind first.
Mm.
Do you know your audience, and are you making something that is going to be valued by them, or are you trying to make a convincing case about yourself first? I used the phrase earlier, from you, not about you. If something is from you and it's framed almost like a gift, what is the gift that you can give to an audience member that they're going to be very, very happy to receive? And again, after they've spent time listening to your podcast, would they say that was time well spent? To me, that's creative bravery. If it is something where the show is not from you, but it's about you, and you're putting it out and trying to force it onto people as a way to turn them into customers in a very short period of time, and people sample it and leave after a minute because it sounds and feels like an infomercial, that is not creatively brave. And in a way, I would say that the second example, I don't think you should make a podcast if that's what the likely outcome is going to be, because it's going to be a waste of your time and money. And podcasts, I think, as anybody who's in the space knows, they're a lot of work to do well, but they really over deliver when they're done well. So making sure you know what success looks like, and what a gift looks like before you start making it and before you green light the show is a great way to make sure that you're off on the right path and making a good use of your marketing options.
Love it. So in the book, you have this term that you talk about, the juice, like orange juice, the juice. What does that mean? What is the juice, and what should these marketers be looking for?
So it's funny. So Chris Nelson from earlier, who's other called the Lord Hates a Coward tattoo. He and I both learned about the juice at the same time from a guy named Scott Rensberger, who is a journalist in the States who came up and basically taught a whole new TV station starting from scratch about how to tell better stories. And his goal was, if you think about local news, every day there's multiple newscasts, and every day it just, there's an hour of stories. Most people forget every single story after the newscast is over. And his goal was not just to remember the story that you put out the next day or the next week, but people would remember it for months and years. And this is over 25 years ago. That's how old I am. But there are stories I remember.
You don't look it.
Well, it's an enormous amount of skincare. But there are stories I
Your
still remember.
dermatologist has earned it.
Yeah, exactly. Boom. There's stories I still remember from 25 years ago that were so good because they were filled with this idea of the juice. And the juice is this concept of it's kind of hard to actually define it, but you just know when a story has the juice. And the juice could be, it has an unbelievable character, or it has a very unusual, point of view, or an unusual through line. It has a fabulous beginning. It has a really memorable end where, I think a lot of times people think about, they record something and they just put it out in the way that you recorded it from beginning to end linearly. Scott was really about figure out how to rearrange your story so that you start with something unbelievable where people are, if you don't have a great opening, people are going to leave and they'll never hear the rest of it. But you also have to have an unbelievable ending. And this is something that stuck with me a lot. He would talk about movies and say, you can have a movie with a great beginning and an unbelievable middle and a mediocre end, and everybody comes away being like, it was okay. And you could have a movie that has a good beginning, a mediocre middle, and a phenomenal ending, and everybody comes away saying like, that was the greatest movie I've ever seen in my life. I think we undervalue endings too. So, the juice is the stuff that makes people pop up and pay attention and being like, what is this thing? This doesn't fit my pattern. This is unusual. And it's something that is memorable and unique enough that they're going to tell other people about it, and to be able to have recall on it years later. It's a high bar, but
Amazing.
it's
Yeah.
creatively, it's an awesome bar to hold yourself to.
Put a sticky note by your computer that says, bring the juice.
Yes.
Or,
Yeah.
or
Honestly,
where's the juice?
yeah. And honestly, there's very much that piece, if you have anybody else that can hold you accountable, any collaborators you have, whether it's creative bravery or juice or any of those sorts of things, bringing in versions of a story, being like, can we make this better? Can we add some juice to this? It's really good. It's like it really works.
Awesome. Awesome. I feel there's another tattoo for Chris.
Yes. Here, where's the juice?
Steve, we got a few minutes left. Anything you want to wrap up with?
I just want to say that, like, thank all of you for spending all your time and attention here. And I hope it was a good use of your time and attention, that you will say it is time well
Great
spent.
questions.
Yeah, these are really great questions. And I'm sure we couldn't get to all of them. But yeah, just really enjoyed this, Roger. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, I think there's very few people in this world that are as unique and eclectic as you and your experiences. You're an entrepreneur, you're an innovator, you're now an author. I think you put so much care and attention to the things that you put in the world. You've always bucked the status quo, and I think this book is a perfect encapsulation of all that. So I really encourage everybody to go out and pick up the book. You can buy it wherever books are sold, both online and offline. Also, you've got an incredible Audible version of the book. Why don't you just quickly mention, sort of 1 minute on that?
Yeah, so thank you, because I honestly, we had so much fun making the audiobook for this, more like a podcast than an audiobook. And I have a friend named Pedro Mendez, another one named Gaetan Harris that I used to work with in podcasting. And Pedro used to direct audiobooks at a major publisher, and he couldn't do all the stuff he wanted to do because it's fairly rigid conventions and status quo in audiobooks. And when we started talking about this audiobook for unconventional marketing and unconventional strategies, we were like, what could we do that's different in an audiobook? He's like, we're going to do all the things I've always wanted to do in an audiobook. And so there is music and sound effects, and he pops into the book periodically. And I hope we had a lot of fun making it. And I hope it is a much more fun-filled, playful audiobook than you might be used to.
Yeah, it's definitely what I would consider not just a listen and a read. It's a whole experience. Awesome.
Unless, of course, you don't like my voice. There's a lot of this in here.
This is a bit of a trial run. This is a bit of
exactly.
a test case. Well, thanks so much to everyone who joined us today. The book is called Earn It. Go out and find it, and continue being brave as marketers and bring in the juice. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks.